Oh, yeah, it looks like Member Marquez is going to be pulled over. She just emailed me.
I see her. Great. Okay.
All right, we just looks like we need just 2 more members and we should be good to go.
Okay. So we just need 1 more.
All right, welcome everyone. We are just waiting for a quorum. It looks like Member Ariola just joined, so I believe we've got it. So when you're ready.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
You're ready?
Yes.
Adrian? All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular Board of Directors meeting for East Bay Community Energy. The time as I have it is 5:03 p.m. And we're meeting via teleconference pursuant to provisions set forward in AB 361 that allow for exceptions to the Brown Act. And this meeting is available to the public at the link that was listed on the agenda on ebce.org. And I will turn it over at this time to our clerk to please call the roll.
Great. Thank you very much. Alameda County. Alameda County. Albany. Albany. Berkeley. Berkeley. Dublin. Fremont. Fremont.
Did you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Hayward.
Present.
Thank you. Livermore.
Here.
Thank you. Newark.
Here.
Thanks. Oakland. Oakland. Piedmont.
Here.
Thank you. Pleasanton. Pleasanton. Tracy.
Present.
Thank you. Union City. Union City. Community Advisory Committee.
Present.
Thank you. San Leandro.
Present.
Thank you. Emeryville.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Now it's the time for public comment. This will be public comment for any items that are EBCE related, but not otherwise on this meeting agenda. I will also accept public comment for the closed session at this time. Public comment will be limited to 2 minutes. Looks like, all right, Adrian, you saw that Dan was.
Yes, yes, I have noted.
Great. Public comment will be limited to 2 minutes, and I will check with our clerk to see first if anyone has submitted any electronic comments. And it looks like Member Harrison has joined us as well. Welcome.
Great, thank you. I have noted. We do not have written comments submitted at this time, but we have to. But Jessica Tovar has her hand raised. You can recognize her for 2 minutes.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Jessica Tovar with the East Bay Clean Power Alliance. And I had submitted an email to board members, alternate and community advisory committee folks in March about the Transformative Climate Communities Grant, which JPA's Joint Powers Authorities were eligible to apply for. And one of the grants I believe it's one of four, is at $35 million, which could be used towards community-based microgrids, decarbonization upgrades for electrification. And I believe this is a grant that's provided for the state of California. But this is just one of many examples of potential money outside of EBCE's funds from the state and federal that EBCE could play a role in applying for and regranting to our community groups within East Bay Community Energy Territory. So I'm curious if EBCE has chosen to apply for this grant. That is one thing. And then I also wanted to make a quick acknowledgement. If folks have not heard that Dave McCord from the Sierra Club, very active in the Energy Committee and hugely active in advocating for East Bay Community Energy, has passed away recently. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this, but I wanted to honor him as one of the elders that was very active in advocating for a community choice program centered in investing back into the community. Thank you. Clean power to the people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Are there any other hands raised?
There are no further hands raised.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Speaker. Condolences on your loss and to the entire community for that loss. And I will just briefly direct staff to please communicate directly with Ms. Tovar regarding that grant and whether EBCE has applied. We are now going to enter into closed session at a link provided by our clerk to the board. You should have received this link, I believe, around 4:30. Adrian, did everyone receive that at the same time? Am I correct?
Yes.
You understand that?
Yes.
If you did not receive that, if you could please, board members, use the raise hand feature so Adrian knows that you need to receive that. So our general counsel Intercalsa will need to receive that. Anyone else? Okay, it looks like folks have that link. So we will go ahead and do that. Then we will return and report out of closed session. And I just want to note right now, as our CEO is abroad at the moment. So we are going to, when we return, I do want to take things slightly out of order and move up items 17 to just after the consent agenda. So if folks are okay with that, we'll do that when we return. But for now, everyone, let's go to the closed session and we'll return, as soon as we can. Thanks.
easier.
We're filtering back in, Adrian, so I'll just give everyone a moment.
Okay, thank you.
And we had no reportable actions in our closed session, just direction to our labor negotiators. So we can go ahead, close out that item. And next step, I'm just going to give folks another minute for our members to all get in here. 1, 2. Wait till we have a quorum before we move on.
Great.
All right, looks like we've got 8 back in here. Is that your count too, Adrian?
Yes, I'll let the record reflect that Member Tiedemann is at the meeting. I've reflected in roll call.
Very good.
And Dan
Mhm.
Call. Yes.
Yes, and Member Calb is here as well. So that takes us to our consent agenda. Members, are there any questions or anything to pull from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none. Is there any electronic comment on the consent agenda?
There is no electronic comment, although I do see that we have a member of the public with their hand raised.
Very good. Please recognize the speaker with 2 minutes.
Great. Tom Kelly, you are recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. I just wanted to point out that the consent calendar includes some financial reports, but in fact, other committees have seen more extensive reports. There's an unaudited financial statement and also a proposed budget for the next fiscal year. And I wanted to say that I don't think the board can adequately analyze issues like item 17 on tonight's agenda without actually seeing a more in-depth report on the agency's financial status. So with that in mind, frankly, I don't see how you can have a full discussion on item 17 without knowing what kind of financial shape the agency is in. Thank you.
Thank you. There is no further public comment.
Very good. Thank you. I will go ahead and close public comment at this time. Colleagues, if there's any discussion on the consent agenda or if there is a motion, I'm happy to entertain it at this time. Member Hannon?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Do I have a second?
Second, Teresa Cox Fremont.
Thank you very much. We have a motion from Member Hannon and a second from Member Cox. Please call the roll.
Great, thank you very much. Alameda County. Alameda County. Albany.
Yes.
Thank you. Berkeley. Berkeley. Dublin. Dublin.
Aye.
Thank you. Fremont. Fremont.
Here, aye.
Thank you. Hayward.
Aye.
Thank you. Livermore.
Yes.
Thank you. Newark.
Aye.
Great. Oakland.
Aye.
Thank you. Piedmont. Piedmont.
Yes, apologies for my technical difficulties. Aye.
Thank you. Pleasanton. Pleasanton, Tracy.
Aye.
Thank you. Union City, San Leandro,
Aye.
thank you, and Emeryville.
Aye.
Consent agenda passes.
All right, thank you. Colleagues, I mentioned earlier in the meeting, but I will just say again that I'd like to move up. Item 17, it is it's the big piece that we will be considering this evening. So I want to make sure everyone's fresh as we consider it. So staff, if you're ready, you can go ahead and take it away on the presentation.
Sure, Adrian, bring it up. Jim Dorrance is going to be presenting that item for us today, but I wanted just to make a few comments before we jump in. So I think the first most important comment is to contextualize this particular policy in the context of the budget. This is really an 8-year policy we're seeking to put in place that's going to outline the minimum quantities of renewable energy and carbon-free energy we would seek to procure in any given year between now and 2030, when our 100% renewable targets kick in. And so what we are trying to do here is provide stair steps to get from point A to point B that will help us determine how much long-term new renewable energy we need to contract for, shorter, medium-term renewable energy and carbon-free energy. I think it's really important to note, though, that this policy in no way constrains in a given year or over time our ability to move more quickly. And so as we did present to the Finance Committee, and we will be bringing to the full board in May, due to our current fiscal position and our forecasts for this coming year, we do indeed believe that some incremental expenditure on more renewable energy procurement is absolutely merited. What you're going to hear from staff in May, though, is a focus on investing these funds in new long-term renewable energy projects so that we really are creating incremental new clean energy and incrementally reducing carbon emissions and air pollution, as opposed to going out in one particular year and buying, say, 20, 30, 40% more renewables from operating units. The staff recommendation in May will be much more oriented towards buying 50 more megawatts of new renewable energy that we might not otherwise have bought, and then having that be a durable increase in our ongoing procurement of renewables. So with that, Jim, why don't you take over?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So as Nick mentioned, we're starting with talking about the board adopted zero emission goal for 2030 that was adopted in December of 2020. And then we're going to kind of discuss, as we did in February, the path to get there. But I'm also going to use this time to discuss the procurement that EVC has done to date, and then some of the work around the integrated resource planning, both the one from 2020 and then the one that is happening in 2022. So I'll give some details of what that entails and how that both fed into the carbon-free goal and the planning for the schedule as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, we start with the ask. So staff is asking the board to adopt a schedule for zero emissions by 2030. And notably here, staff is asking for those targets for Bright Choice to be approved and to be adopted, again, to aid procurement moving forward. The precursor to this was the December 2020 board approval for the clean energy goal. And that time was backed by the analysis from the 2020 Integrated Resource Planning, the IRP proceeding, and that the work to fill in the gaps on this schedule will come as part of the 2022 IRP that is ongoing during this year. And I'll talk about both those parts here within the presentation. So just what we're going to go over today, we'll begin with some background. So I'll use the presentation to discuss the 2020 IRP that was presented to the board. That was the basis for the clean energy target. I'm going to highlight some of the relevant staff reports and the board actions that got us to today and to this schedule and to this ambitious goal. I'm going to discuss some of the long-term renewable procurement that we've had, the purchase power, some of the stuff that we've done and some of the stuff that we're doing moving forward. Also discuss and kind of go over our current renewable position and what's needed to meet the schedule that I'm presenting. And then I'll present the actual schedule itself with the annual purchase goals for Bright Choice through 2030 that the board's asking, that staff's asking the board to adopt. And then I'll go over next steps as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we start with the integrated resources planning, which I'll abbreviate as the IRP here. There is a definition here, but this is a CPUC requirement for EBCE and other LLCs. It's done every other year. We're currently, as mentioned, working on the 2022 IRP. The one before that, as I repeatedly mentioned, was 2020. It is a resource planning requirement. It's based on prescribed GHG targets, and these are provided by the CPUC and based on long-term statewide emission goals. It's a detailed resource planning exercise to demonstrate how these goals will be met over a 10-year planning horizon based on analysis and modeling. And so we establish these goals and we show the resources that LLCs will need to procure to meet them over time. For 2020, we required a model required by the CPUC to model portfolios for two distinct emission targets, the 46 million metric tons and 36 million metric tons that are shown here in bold. In addition to that, staff conducted modeling for two other scenarios. What the resource make would be and the associated cost would be to meet these goals, and that's in the table here. The table below is a summary of the analysis that was presented to the board in 2020 December, and it's merely used here as a reference. This is taken from the work we did in 2020 and the analysis we did in 2019. You know, the markets have changed a lot since then, and I want to be clear that this is not relevant to the energy market we see today, but this is illustrative of the work that we did during the 2020 IRP. And you know, when we go through the 2022 IRP process, we'll be displaying similar cost stuff that we see here, but you know, the markets, the energy markets and the energy costs have gone up significantly since the 2020 timeframe. So just want to be clear, what we're looking at here is more illustrative of what we do as staff during the IRP and not indicative of today's 2022 market. So again, it's for illustrative purposes. Next slide, please. So more about the IRP and what it is. So it's a modeled analysis of customer load, existing generation that EVC has, and then expected resources needed to meet specific emission goals, both those required by the CPUC and those additional ones that EVC provided as well. It includes attention to the requirements for liability, projections of resource diversity, and then portfolio costs, associated costs of the resources and content. This is all modeled kind of in different forms and different analyses, and it's able to give us kind of a roadmap to reach the stated goals. Points out the costs associated with that and kind of some of the risks to the portfolio as well. So again, a bunch of modeling, you know, we look at kind of what our needs are, what our load are, and we share this with the board and we kind of go through this heavy kind of analysis and modeling work for that. Again, the table here was part of the 2020 IRP. And so it just, again, it's an example to show what we do during this IRP process. And it's a breakdown of the resources that were modeled then to meet those requirements at the time. You know, these requirements since 2020 have changed significantly. The one that we will be doing here in 2022 will look a lot different. And again, the takeaway here is that in 2020, we ran this IRP model, but this is, again, just kind of what our process is and what we're trying to show is that this shows this kind of breakdown for resources. And this was part of the board presentation we did in December of 2020 when we established the clean energy goal. Again, illustrative purposes for the table, not indicative of today's markets. So again, that's kind of just a brief idea of what we do in the IRP using the 2020 data as example for that. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the IRP. Now we're going to get into some of the relevant board items that are relating to the clean energy goal and the schedule we're presenting tonight. The 2020 IRP was presented to the board in June and July. This included the CPC prescribed emission goals that were required of the filing. For the December 2020 meeting, more aggressive emission targets were presented than those required by the CPC. And these were analyzed with cost, resource mix, impacts to reliability. And these are presented to the board with the results associated from the scenario modeling as part of the IRP process. Next slide, please. So with the data from the 2020 IRP, the board adopted the most aggressive of the emission goals from the scenarios presented a couple of slides ago. This was the goal of 0 net emissions by 2030. This was back from the cost and risk analysis of the IRP. So now we'll move closer to today. So using the 2020 IRP analysis as the basis, staff worked to develop a schedule. And as Nick mentioned, that would give us annual steps to reach that target and allow EBC staff to, to really work on our procurement and being able to add stuff in that portfolio with a long-term plan. Where typically in the past, we have had a target for Bright Choice 1 year out. And the idea is to create kind of, as Nick mentioned, a minimum threshold that we can procure to so we can start to build in our short-term portfolio and our long-term portfolio over a longer time horizon. The schedule that was presented in February was presented as informational. And it was highlighted with annual increases in renewable energy for Bright Choice, increases in carbon-free power, and an annual reduction in emissions over the course of the planning horizon. Next slide, please. Okay, that brings us closer to today. And again, as mentioned earlier, staff is asking the board to adopt the schedule that we're providing, and we're giving a little bit more background here as well, in addition to what was presented in February. So, based on the modeling that we did for the 2020 IRP with cost and resource types, in our existing load, the 2030 zero emission goal was adopted. So staff is now asking the board for adoption of the schedule with annual targets to reach that goal. So the 2030 goal was approved. Now we're trying to find the way to get there to assist with our planning as well. Specifically, staff is asking the board to adopt the Bright Choice plan, because ultimately that's going to dictate a lot of the plan-wide emissions. We all know Renewable 100 is emissions free. So really our plan-wide emissions are primarily dictated by those renewable and carbon-free percentages of Bright Choice. And so we're specifically asking through this memo and through this report, the staff to adopt that for Bright Choice target. Next slide, please. Okay, so now as I mentioned, we're going to go over some of our long-term procurement of the stuff we've done to date. So EBC has undertaken 3 long-term renewable energy request for offers, RFOs, one in 2018, one in 2020, and we're currently ongoing on the one in 2022. And so these are events that EBC has where we ask developers to, to provide a variety of different projects types that staff evaluates with our existing portfolio resources and what we know about load and our needs over time. From the 18 and 2020 RFO, EBC contracted 800 megawatts of renewable energy approximately and 450 megawatts of battery storage. And that's roughly 25% of our sales in current times. Of those projects that came from the 2 earlier RFOs, the first project was online in 2020. And there are currently 3 renewable projects online and 1 standalone storage projects and more coming soon, hopefully 1 here in the near term as well this year, and the rest of them following suit after that. Next slide, please. So this chart shows the renewable energy and large hydro that's been contracted currently through 2030. And this is tracking against the schedule that I'm presenting tonight. And so what we see here are a variety of products that EBCE purchases, but they're in aggregate form. So we have short-term and long-term renewable energy, and then large hydro as well. And then that's the top line is again the annual steps of the schedule. And so the orange bars are indicative of the additional procurement that EVCE would have to make to reach the prescribed target. I leave them orange and blank on purpose because we will fill that in with a variety of products, including more long-term resources. It'll be balanced, continually balanced with some short-term purchase and large hydro as well. But we know there is variability with both the intermittent resources of our renewable portfolio and especially that for large hydro. And so as we work to fill in these gaps over time, we'll be continually contract within the guidelines of the schedule itself if adopted, but also know that there's variability on both the products generation themselves and the associated costs. So it's the pieces that we'll put together going down the planning horizon. And I come back to the IRP, the integrated resource plan, things like that will also inform how we fill in those needs in future years as well, and what those resource types are and what works best with our existing portfolio based on the associated modeling and analysis of the IRP. The bars are as percent of total sales. And again, the top line there is indicative of the schedule we're presenting tonight. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the 2020 IRP, the analysis that went into that, the adoption of the 2030 clean energy goal. We went over our existing pool of resources, what we've done in procurement, what our kind of open positions are and what we've contracted so far. So we're going to move now into the actual schedule and the annual targets for specifically for Bright Choice. I think some of us have seen this schedule before in the form, but I'll still walk through it. So this includes annual renewable and carbon-free energy per year, including the actuals for the previous years of EVCE. And again, the future years is the schedule we are asking the board to adopt. It has emissions from both the climate registry emission factor calculation and then the current emission calculation methodology from the power source disclosure report, which is denoted here as PSDR. And just a side note, the current memo here asking for the adoption touches on some of this stuff, but for those that have questions and want to take a deeper dive into emissions and PCC2s, that is really covered in the February board item. And there's a pretty robust section in there as well. But it's covered there. It's available to be read. But this is the schedule we're asking to adopt, and this is the particulars of it. We include the California Renewable Portfolio Standard percents on the far right column. And the goal of this is, of course, to reach zero emission 2030, but it's balanced with the robust renewable percent by 2030, which has us 15% over the state's RPS goal. Yeah, okay, next slide. So again, similar in form to the previous slide in the table contents, but these are the percents for the aggregate of all of our plans. And so this is the mixture of Bright Choice and Renewable 100 for our portfolio and the associated renewable and carbon-free targets through the planning horizon to 2030 and the associated emissions. And again, these numbers are largely dictated by that content of Bright Choice. And those are the targets that we're really asking the board to look at and to adopt. But obviously the all plans one as well is indicative of the content as we move forward. I think that's good for here. So next slide, please. So, as I've often mentioned, I'd like to look at data in many ways. So this is a chart representation of the previous table. And so these, not to be confused with the previous bar chart a couple of slides back, but these are the actual rough estimates of the renewable and carbon-free parts of the schedule itself. So we see a large commitment to renewable energy throughout the planning horizon, and then balanced with a commitment to large hydro throughout based on availability. In addition to that, we see the gray line is the plan-wide emissions and a reduction down to 0 by 2030, and then the state RPS as well. So again, this is just a chart representation of the table in the previous slide, just as a different way to look at it for those that visualize things differently. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's kind of touch on what we went over here. So again, we discussed the 2000 IRP analysis and what that is and the modeling that went into that and how that aided and assisted the board's adoption of the 2030 emission goal. We discussed the board's adoption of that goal and the informational items that were presented to the board during that 2020 planning horizon. We showed EBCE's planning or procurement activities to date, the renewable energies that we've done and what we're currently doing. We also showed what's needed and the open position we need to reach the requirements of the schedule being presented. And then we presented the actual schedule itself for Bright Choice, the one that which we're asking the board to adopt. Yeah, and so, what are we doing now? So bunch of stuff. Obviously, we like to be busy. We're currently working on the 2022 IRP. This is the every year cycle. And this includes preparing the modeling assumptions for that. The analysis as part of the 2020 IRP will add a lot of details to the schedule I'm providing, resource type, cost, and risks, some of the stuff we discussed it earlier. It will fill in some of the blanks here for the resource planning and again, really highlight what the costs are going to be to reach that. But that component really comes out of the IRP process as it did in 2020 and kind of takes a better look at the current market and market conditions, availability of resources, and also what's needed for reliability purposes. Just like during the 2020 process, the 2022 will include a lot of board outreach. We'll be showing you guys what we're doing as we kind of get in the thick of the modeling assumptions and what we're seeing, and that will happen during the summer as well. The 2022 IRP will also provide a detailed plan of what resources are needed, and again, what those associated costs will be to reach that 2030 goal and beyond. In addition to the IRP, staff is always conducting ongoing portfolio optimization. So this looks at contracted generation and how that fits with our current load, and then what needs exist. And then we use this when we evaluate future projects, which we're doing now as part of the 2022 RFO as well. So we're looking at our portfolio, what we got, what we need, and we're doing risk and probabilistic assessments of how new projects fit within our portfolio. Next slide, please. Okay, so next steps, again, we're asking the board to adopt the schedule to meet the adopted 2030 clean energy goal. In particular, we're asking for the board to adopt the schedule for the Bright Choice plan. And this, again, is based on analysis from the 2020 IRP, but more importantly, will be fed by the 2022 IRP cycle, in addition to staff's portfolio analysis. The importance of this will aid EBC staff in making good purchasing decisions over the long term, and also allow us to get good economics on those deals because we'll have a long-term planning horizon. This provides a lot of direction both for our short-term purchases for the years of 2022 and 23, in addition to aiding us to make long-term purchase decisions through 2024 and beyond. And again, will really aid us as we kind of go through this 2022 RFP as well, which we're currently working through. And again, this will be, this is back to the 2022 RFP. I know there's a lot of acronyms and years, but this is an ongoing process, and we'll be presenting components of that to the board as well as we start to shortlist projects from that we're currently evaluating and reviewing. In addition to that, staff will continue to and always evaluate other long-term renewable projects. And as always, we have a heavy focus on those projects that are in our service territories. We give those a lot of attention through the evaluation. We, as everyone knows here and have heard, we are limited on those projects, but when they come in, we take serious consideration of that. And it's really important to us to put projects within our service territory, and we always have a strong eye on that, both in the previous RFOs and including the most recent one that we're doing now for 2022. Next slide, please. So that's all I got. I think we can go ahead and move on to questions. I really appreciate the time tonight.
Very good. Thank you so much, Jim. Colleagues, with your indulgence, I'm going to entertain public comment first for expediency's sake. Adrian, is there any electronically submitted comment?
There is no electronically submitted comment.
Okay, and we will next go to the members or the folks on the attendees list. Please also fill out a speaker card in addition to for all those people who are recognized. So Adrian, I will let you go ahead with the order And please allow 2 minutes per speaker on this item.
Great, thank you very much. We have 4 speakers with their hands raised: Tom Kelly, Chris Gilbert, Jim Lutz, and Jessica Tovar. I'll recognize Tom Kelly for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. I hope all of you received a copy of my correspondence to the board that Adrian circulated earlier today, and pretty much covers everything I really wanted to say on this particular topic. Just a couple of things based on Nick's comments and Jim's comments. First of all, Nick stated that this is a plan for getting us to 100% renewable by 2030. But that's not, in fact, the case. It's a plan to get us to 60% renewable by 2030 and 100% carbon free. I'd just like to point out that in 2019, EBCE's Bright Choice had already 60% renewable content. So it's going to take us another 8 years to get to that point if you approve this plan. I do take issue with Nick's contention that this is something that you can change in the future if you choose to. You, in effect, are giving the agency a plan that they're going to work hard on and that is going to lock them into some decisions that would be different if you were to actually reject this plan and institute something much more aggressive. My email to you pointed out that a number of CCAs are at or near 100% renewable already. And I think PCE has a promise to get to 100% carbon free by 2025. The last thing I'll say is that the IRP that Jim talks about is really a document required by the CPUC just to make sure that the agency will be able to deliver electricity to its customers. It doesn't constrain EBCE from taking a much more aggressive approach to reducing carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Gilbert, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Looking at Tom Kelly's letter to the board and then watching this presentation, I realized there's something that's missing from the presentation. While it contains, seemingly reasonable increases in renewable energy and decreases in GHG emissions, there isn't, what is missing is any reference to the outside world. And by that, I mean other CCAs, utilities, et cetera. Organizations, whether companies or nonprofits, usually are looking at other companies or nonprofits in their universe and seeing how they're doing. There's Charity Navigator with the nonprofit world, for instance. EBCE seems to be operating in its own universe. I know it's kind of a monopoly, but I think it's important to measure its progress against how others are doing. And while this may be reasonable, the way it's increasing renewable and decreasing emissions, is it the best way? Maybe there are other CCAs that are doing much quicker changes or more changes 1 year and less changes another year. From Tom Kelly's letter, he shows that EBCE is way off the chart for emissions compared to other CCAs. Why is that? Will that be changed with this plan that's being presented? So I just question, I urge the staff and the board to look at others in the field and not just rely on these internal projections and presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Lutz, you are recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. I had a question that this is seems to be completely about the Bright Choice mix, but we have several cities opting up to make the renewable 100 their default choice or default for at least part of their constituency. So my question is, what fraction of sales, total sale, EBC East, total sales are Bright Choice now? And how has that changed, and how is it going to be changing with the different jurisdictions changing their defaults? And then what are the, and I'm guessing that this target or budget or goal doesn't preclude chances of getting to the 100% renewable or zero greenhouse gas emission sooner than 2030 if price changes and technologies change, especially since PG&E rates are going up. It seems that there's headroom there to invest more earlier. So those were my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Tovar, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Hi, Jessica Tovar with the East Bay Power Alliance. You know, one of the things that came up back in 2016 when we were advocating for this East Bay Community Choice Program was a huge emphasis on not using the unbundled RECs, or what in the document is referred to as the PCC3. So just reiterating that. And you know, one of the things that we've also been emphasizing is our want to not include nuclear energy and have a strong commitment against that. And then one of the other things that I noticed under what is considered renewable in the state of California is forms of incineration, which is also very problematic. Especially when it comes to environmental justice. So I wanted to highlight that. And so, you know, I feel like the RECs enable certain types of energy that's not clean to be used and sold as if it is. And so that's why we don't want those PCC3 or unbundled RECs, because there's a lot of greenwashing involved. So I just want to highlight these points because that really was something that was brought up very early on in envisioning this program. And last but not least, the huge emphasis in serious local development and really highlighting a detailed plan for doing that, because that's where a lot of the community benefits, the jobs, the resilience, and the transformation lies for our communities. It's not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's about reducing all kinds of emissions that really cause a lot of health problems for the local community, a lot of environmental injustice. So I wanted to highlight that. Clean power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Thank you, Adrian. Colleagues, next up is discussion. I am going to call on the chair of the CAC first, because normally she would have shared her report by this time. So if you can please share the context of the discussion at the CAC on this item, and Olivia.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. So this discussion was not really typical for the CAC, and neither was the final vote. Technically, a motion of support passed, but that vote was 4 yes, 2 no, 3 abstentions, and 3 absences. So it did not even pass with a majority. And while there was not great opposition, there was great confusion. The presentation lacks a lot of really important detail on items that we care quite a lot about. Members were wanting to see additional detail around things like workforce and risk. There is a strong lack of detail around local development. And so I think this kept folks from supporting in a really strong way. I'm hearing some things from public comments around like, how is this compared to other things, and what are we really looking at here? And so that the vagueness of the presentation and the lack of detail and how this is really going to affect each of your constituencies and each of your specific communities was evidenced in the inability to get strong support for a plan to reduce emissions, which is something that generally we would be enthusiastic about, and I think needs to really be looked at. And then I'll save my personal comments until
Let's go. Let's go.
after that.
Thank
Get in
you.
the other.
Member Cox, do you mind muting your device, please? And next up will be Vice Chair Lopez.
Thank you very much for the presentation. If you can go over to slide, I'm looking at slide 10, 11, 12. Thank you for that. I especially appreciate slide 12. There was a commenter that actually has articulated my question and concern about what I'm seeing here, and that is that it is obfuscatory in the sense, and I believe Olivia also had just said that, it doesn't show us really being at 100%. By 2030, it's actually it's a percentage below the 100%. So I was wondering if you could please clarify that. And also in the context, if you can clarify all that, but I would hope and I anticipate a number of the jurisdictions that still haven't opted up will be opting up sooner than later, and hopefully before 2030. I see on our agenda that we do have another jurisdiction in motion there to do that. That would bring us, I believe, to 8, if I'm not mistaken. And so if we have all of our jurisdictions, especially when we have Stockton in the mix, demanding or asking for 100% renewable for their cities, how does that weigh in with these numbers that seem to be a little further off in time, further forward in time? Does that question make sense? I have a feeling that we're going to actually need 100% renewable. The demand is going to be upon us within the next couple of years. So how does that jive with this 2030 schedule?
Yeah, so 11 is really the slide that is most relevant in terms of the schedule. And it's the schedule for Bright Choice. So certainly if 100% of EBC jurisdictions were to default customers to renewable 100, say by 2025, these presumably, there will still be some small number of customers who elect to opt down to Bright Choice. So the Bright Choice plan would be the plan that is outlined in slide 11, which gives you a schedule for renewables and carbon-free procurement that adds up to Bright Choice being 100% carbon-free or clean by 2030. But if you think about slide 12 and you think about the timeline, if say 95% of customers were on renewable 100 in 2025 and 5% were on Bright Choice, as you suggest, Councilmember Lopez, and if you think about the experience we have with opt-down, depends on the jurisdictions, but it's in the single digits, the percentage of customers that opt down. Yes, if that were the case, then 95% of our energy, more than 95% of our energy would be from renewables, because 95% of our customers on 100% and 5% serve with 50, 60, 70% renewables, depending on the year.
So it's possible that we could attain, if it's led by the jurisdictions, we could attain the 100% minus, of course, those that opt down. we could do that ahead of
Certainly,
the 2030.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I think the goal here is really to find that balance between being able to continue to offer a rate that is durably priced at a discount and plotting that path to 100% clean energy. A comment that was made, that's been made in a number of meetings, is about the comparison between East Bay and another CCA. So, we'll take, say, MCE. In 2021, for instance, MCE's base product, which is 60% renewable range, priced more than 10% of PG&E. We as a program have prioritized continuing to maintain Bright Choice at a discount, and we have been able to do so throughout our program operations. I think the power of community choice is the ability of individual jurisdictions to decide, hey, we as a community, we prioritize 100% renewables, and we believe as a community that we're comfortable defaulting 100% of residential or commercial or both onto a rate that is priced at a premium. And you're absolutely right. We're seeing many communities doing that, and we're seeing actually positive response from customers. And so, we are excited that 2 more communities are taking action today, and we stand ready to continue to support all of our communities in their efforts to do that, and to go and procure the incremental renewable energy necessary to support that. But at the same time, we still have communities for whom setting Bright Choice as the discount, setting Bright Choice as the default rate at a discount remains a high priority.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Next up is Member Harrison.
Thank you very much, Nick. I had a question about what percentage of our load right now is in cities, and I know some people will opt out, so this isn't perfect, but what percentage of our load is in cities that are at 100% renewable?
It's around 25%.
Really? I thought it'd be more than that because we have more cities that are, I thought, than that. Really? Okay. Well, that changes my sort of calculation then. Yeah.
So Kate, the cities that we have today are Albany, Dublin, Hayward, Pleasanton, San Leandro, and Berkeley. Our largest cities by load and customer count are Oakland, Fremont, and I believe Tracy may be our 3rd largest.
Okay. So the focus on what it looks like with Bright Choice is based on that load percentage, essentially.
Yes.
Because this report focuses more on what's going on in Bright Choice than what's going on in the 100% renewable. And that's
right. This is not really about 100% renewable, because if you're
Okay.
100% renewable, then it's 100% renewable. So we don't
Okay.
have to talk about kind of a path to 100% renewable, because that's what the product dictates.
Okay. So my questions are really based on this issue with Bright Choice. I feel like Bright Choice is about 60% renewable right now, correct? And then a lot
About
of
40
unspecified.
About 45% renewable, and 45%, 40, I think our current plan, our current plan would call for 2022 would call for 45% renewable and 63% carbon free.
Okay. So, as we see other CCAs are making their less renewable choice still more green. So I'm wondering about this 43-67% and whether we are being less ambitious than we might be. And I know part of that is based on cost. So it seems like there's 3 factors, right? We have a certain pool of money in our reserves, and we have 3 choices. We can have reserves, which helps with our credit rating. We can lower the cost to people in plans, or we can make our lower plan more renewable, or some combination of these things. So I guess my question is, what are you thinking about more immediately making the Bright Choice Plan, more renewable. What's the change between, for example, this year and next year? Not 2030, but like, what's the glide path? What's it look like between now and next year?
So I think as a default position, irrespective of the conditions in the fiscal year, the glide path would be the glide path on slide 10. So 45 to 49 to 52 to 56 to 60 to 64 to 67 to 71 to 75 renewable, and then so on and so forth for carbon free. Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, sorry.
And so that is the glide path. Now, then there are the fiscal conditions, right, that we operate under. And so we did present to the Finance and Administration Committee last week an initial cut of our budget. And the budget includes both increasing our value proposition, so a bigger discount to consumers. It includes more investment in local programs, and it includes money set aside to buy incremental renewables that would be above and beyond the schedule that is published here.
Okay. So if I were to ask you theoretically, how much more would it cost to move this goal to 2025, which is what a lot of CCAs have as their goal? What would that look like? How much money is that? I guess I want to translate this to dollars.
Yeah.
Is there a way to do that?
I do not think we can translate
Okay.
to 2025. I think we can translate in a given year. We can tell you generally what it would cost to get to 100% renewable. But by the issue is, in a given year, you can talk about getting to 100% renewable, but it's not necessarily the goal. We're not held to 100% renewable from there on out, right? It may be that this year we decide we have a surplus, we want to spend it on more renewables, but next year we would return to this schedule. Once you change the schedule from 2030 to 2025, you are structurally changing your cost structure.
Right.
And so our current view of our cost structure is, over time, we believe that 100% renewables as a product is more expensive than, over time, what PG&E's rates will be. In a given year, it's going to be different. So in this coming projected budget, we have found that our financials are such that 100% renewables could actually be cheaper, but in past years, it has been significantly more expensive.
Okay, but you haven't done like a calculation if we were to shoot for, we know what we're going to look at the cost for 2030, so we could look at the cost for 2025. Just trying to get a sense. We have $168 million reserve. How much of that would we have to spend to get this goal down to 2025? And you're saying that's not doable as just as an intellectual exercise, or?
It's certainly doable as an intellectual exercise. I think one thing to say is we don't have $168 million in reserves. I don't know, Howard.
Whatever. I just, whatever the number is. Yeah, that's not important.
And so I would say it's really a question of how important is trying to offer a durably lower cost product than PG&E.
Okay.
And so for some cities, that is a priority. And if we do that, if we were to bring this up, then the likelihood that we're able to continue to offer a durably lower cost product to PG&E is significantly reduced.
Okay. And reduced to what? Right now we're 30% below. What would it be reduced to?
I'm sorry.
I can't make right now. I think we have this idea that we're going to be X% below PG&E, right?
We are priced at a 1% below PG&E.
Right. Okay. Sorry, 1%. So if we were to, what I want to know is if we did this by 20, and I'm not saying we should do this. I just need to understand this to vote. If we were to say we want to move that to 2025, will we be 0.25% below PG&E? I guess those are the levers.
I think the way to look at it would be, today we price renewable 100 at a penny above PG&E. Now, in this next fiscal year, our expectation is that's going to be less because of the changes that have happened with the PCIA.
Right.
But we continue to believe that 100% renewable rate is more expensive than PG&E's base product. And that
Yeah, I'm not asking about that though. I'm asking about the discount of Bright Choice.
But that would be, if you were to change Bright Choice to 100% renewable, that's sort of the point of comparison.
Okay,
If you-
okay, that's helpful, but there's a trend line kind of thing. Let me tell you what I'm really interested in. I am less interested in that than the next thing, which is what San Francisco has done. San Francisco is giving a 30% discount to low-income customers to participate in Renewable 100. They are making the choice to make it a more equitable program for those who could not otherwise afford it. So again, three things: reserves, more green, more people participate in green. I'm on the side of more people participate in green. So I don't know if we've thought about that. I think we could look at doing more of that. And there's a benefit to that because as more people get into greener programs, it provides a market signal to do more with greener programs. You know, and at some point, the market tips and it becomes cheaper. You know, if we don't believe that, then we shouldn't be fussing around with markets. But I thought the whole point was more and more people investing in these green things will end up with green being cheaper in the long run. So I'm really worried about the equity side of this. That's my biggest thing.
I believe that program, though, is a pilot program limited to
Yeah.
only 2,500 customers.
Okay.
And so from a scaling perspective, we have over 100,000 care customers in our service territory. So not to suggest that we wouldn't want to evaluate this, but the financial consequences of their program are very small relative to scaling that up for 100% of customers. So I think that's just important to contextualize. If San Francisco is not suggesting they're providing a 30% discount for 100% renewables to all of their care customers.
Yeah, I think it's people that live in low-income housing, frankly. So, okay. Well, so anyway, I'm just saying I need to see like a thing that shows these three things, you know, the percent of green, the cost, reserves, and how they change with every assumption. And I'm not saying that you're doing a bad job at all. I want you to understand that we are still with this plan 15 years ahead of the state, which said we should be at 100% in 2045. So we're like legions ahead. For me to make an informed decision, I need to see how these things balance off against each other. And I'm not really sure I can see that here. Then I had two other really quick questions. One of them has to do with this REC 2 thing, okay? And I'm sorry that, you know, people have tried to explain this to me for years, that these renewable energy credits are not really green credits exactly, right? And one of the complaints from advocates is that we have a much heavier investment in these REC 2s that are produced in like British Columbia than other CCAs. Is that true? Do other CCAs have more California investment than we do?
I don't know, Jim, I don't know that I, off the top of my head, have a point of comparison for our PCC2 portfolio relative to others. What I'll say is, you know, we think about sort of the regional effects of renewable energy on the grid and the regional reductions in emissions. And so when we think about a PCC2, that is a unit of renewable energy that is actually produced and is reducing emissions in the West. And so
right, but people seem to have an issue with it. And so I'm just interested in how we sit compared to other CCAs. Do we know?
I don't have often the specific ratios are not necessarily things that are going to be disclosed. So I can't say that another CCA has this much PCC2 versus, I think many, if not all CCAs have some PCC2 procurement in their portfolios. And you know, yes, there are concerns that have been raised, but I would say that there are concerns raised about many things that are procured, whether it be geothermal power or certain kinds of wind power. So it's always a balance.
Okay. And then my last question is kind of really technical, which is that PG&E has this voluntary allocation of market offer. Are we participating in that?
Yes.
Okay. And is it bringing up our renewable percentage?
It is part of our renewable portfolio. I think as we're balancing our portfolio of resources, the VAMO is part of the mix. Yes.
And are we taking the full allocation we're allowed?
Just to clarify, that the VAMO is upcoming, so there's been no action taken. It's the solicitation that will happen.
I think we're getting into sort of a level of detail that I don't feel comfortable talking
It's
about.
important to me because if we were to participate fully in what's being offered, it would be a 20% increase in our renewable portfolio. So I think it's an important question, and I know it's technical, but this is the kind of thing I need to understand.
Yeah, no, I think it's more of a tactical question. So I think we view some of the stuff as sort of market sensitive around how much VAMO we're going to take. It has to do with there's a market dynamic at play. So to the degree that there's an offline conversation you'd like to have about it.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really, really helpful. And then my really, really last question is, and I'm sorry, I haven't tracked this. Do we have a credit rating now? We do?
Yes.
Okay. So can we reduce our reserves because we already have the credit rating, or is that not doable?
It's the other way around, actually. Once you have continue to seek that you are working towards your target reserve. So we received a credit rating with the clear acknowledgement that we would be continuing to build our reserves because we do not have, we have not achieved our target reserve level.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Chair Eldred.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'm hoping to get clarity on a couple of things that came up here and in the other meeting. So one of the things that I think I heard that I really liked a lot was that there is budgeting for new renewable creation above and beyond what is represented in these charts. Is that correct?
In the context of the budget, yes, that is one of the proposals that we will be bringing forward.
Is this proposal direct investment in creating new renewable resources, and is there a commitment in that proposal to make those new resources local?
The commitment is to set aside funds and to deploy those funds in the context of our ongoing procurement efforts for long-term new renewables to procure resources that we might not have otherwise procured from a cost perspective. We evaluate local and non-local resources in those RFOs. And so is it possible that these funds could go to support incremental local renewables? Possibly. Our biggest challenge with incremental local renewables is access to the resources. There just are not a lot of resources that we see bid into our RFOs.
There are behind the meter resources being explored, and that would these funds go towards the, like, I'm looking for more to address the very clearly expressed concerns around the lack of detail on local development and what this really looks like for our participating communities. So I'm just wondering if you can give us some clarity on that.
You know, we've actually never set a specific target as an agency for local renewables procurement. We do, of course, set aside significant funds in each of our local development business budgets. We do in our procurement have a preference for local projects, and through those preferences have been able to procure wind and solar locally. But again, very limited opportunities to procure at significant volumes. If you can imagine, solar and wind projects are very large. We are in a very space constrained county and then city with the city of Tracy. So you know, the issue you have with behind the meter resources is they do not count per se for say your clean energy targets because they are behind the customer meter. So they're offsetting the customer usage. So from an accounting perspective, it creates a whole other challenge of trying to sort of leverage behind the meter to meet your clean energy goals. Obviously, we have significant amounts of local clean energy that are also being deployed behind the meter through net energy metering. I don't have the latest statistics, but hundreds of megawatts of net energy metering have been deployed, and so we are seeing significant deployment there happening. I think the only other comment I'll say, and this is something that we have consistently seen in our in the analysis of our local development efforts, and that is that local renewable energy projects, local solar projects, as an example, do not create the same, the level of jobs or mitigate the level of local air pollution or mitigate global climate change in the way other local investments do. So all things equal, spending $1 on transportation electrification or building electrification or energy efficiency delivers more of the benefits that we prioritize for our local communities than does a local solar project.
Yeah, every dollar spent on energy efficiency and those kinds of improvements have exponentially larger benefits in a multitude of platforms. Just in general, it's why I'm a huge advocate there. Okay, so I don't hear that thing being addressed, but I do hear it being addressed as well as you can. I'm wondering, the last thing would be if you can kind of just directly speak to the unbundled RECs question. Like, I remember well the lengthy discussions that we got into as we were founding this agency. I'm sure many of you do as well. There is a pretty big concern. Can you just speak to that, and
Sure.
and that will be it.
So unbundled RECs do not count as carbon-free energy. So for the purposes of this schedule, a PCC3 REC would not count, cannot be counted under California emissions accounting as 100% clean or zero emissions. So to the degree that you were to have a PCC3 REC in your portfolio, you would have to incrementally buy other carbon-free resources on top of it to achieve the 100% clean goal.
Okay. I mean, I do know what a REC is. I just, so there's not a plan to continue having these at a higher rate, that they will be decreased, like this plan includes decreasing their participation?
Yeah, I mean, our joint powers, so our joint powers authority explicitly limits our ability to use PCC3 RECs to a 5% level. This 5% of the RPS, right, Jim?
Yeah, correct.
So the state requirement is 10%. You cannot use PCC3 for more than 10% of your RPS. Ours is below that. But for the purposes of the schedule we have laid out here, no resource that has a emissions tag under California rules can be used to achieve our 2030 goal. So a PCC3 would have emissions associated with it, cannot be used. A PCC2 actually cannot be used because it also has an emissions tag associated. So 2030, we can no longer use the PCC2s in the way we would use them today. There are some PCC2s that carry zero emissions with them, but then now we're getting into more complex questions of structure.
Okay, thank you. That addressed my question.
Thank you. Next up is Member Cow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was going to ask a different question, but let me just finish on this on the RECs. So as you pointed out, we have, and I remember this since I'm the one who got this in there, we could only do no more than half of what is allowed for bucket 3 RECs, but we don't have any such limitation on bucket 2 RECs other than the maximum allowed under the state RPS. If we were to self-impose a similar restriction where we could only do half as much as the state RPS allows for bucket 2 RECs, what would that get us? Does that get us any more carbon-free energy by doing that? Is there any benefit to doing that?
Certainly we could do it. I would say because PCC2s that carry, there are PCC2s. There are ways to structure PCC2 transactions such that they carry zero emissions, and there are PCC2 transactions that carry zero, that do carry emissions with them, and it's a question of cost. I think in general, a PCC2 transaction that carries zero emissions in the current market environment is priced similarly to a PCC1. So all things equal, you'll buy a PCC1. But under the schedule that's being proposed, we essentially cannot use PCC2 currently understand them by 2030 because we have to get to 100% clean. So zero emission. So if we, as we think about the resources that we're building, we're really building towards that 100% clean goal. The resources that, if we were to change some incremental PCC2 procurement over a few years, I personally don't think that it would actually have a meaningful effect on the amount of new renewable energy that we built. Because we are building to our 2030 goal. That is what we're building towards. A change in the treatment of how many PCC2s we can or can't buy. It will just mean that we would buy more PCC1s from operating facilities in the near term.
Okay, so as opposed to helping create new renewables.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, opposed to creating new renewables. Yes.
Okay, well, all right. Something to think about. Is there any value to have to self-impose a limit on the bucket too? But I hear what you're saying. The main question I want to ask, and Councilmember Harrison did start this conversation on the thing I wanted to ask anyway. If we were to reduce our discount to 0.5%, how much more? The goal here is not just to have renewables and carbon-free and ultimately all renewables, but it's to reduce our fossil energy that's in Bright Choice as quickly as possible. Reduce how much of it is a dirty energy. So if we were to create our Bright Choice product starting at a 0.5% discount instead of 1%, and therefore we have more money to play with. I don't know how much more, but some amount of more. How would that help us speed up our reduction pathway in reducing our pathway in reducing the amount of dirty energy in the Bright Choice portfolio?
So I think as a durable measure, right? If we said durably, our durable goal is 0.5%, I think you would see a couple percent increase in the amount of renewable energy if you were to do so, but not.
Which means a slight decrease in the dirty energy a little more quickly over the next several years.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Okay. So the question is that marginal decrease in dirty energy that we could get by having a less but still a discount, is it worth doing? I mean, I guess that's just a question for all of us, but it's a thought.
Yeah, I would say, you know, what we are finding, and this is something Council Member Lopez highlighted, is the single greatest driver of moving very quickly for more renewables procurement are individual cities electing to default to 100% renewables. And so I think it really is a question of we have communities, and I'll say in the conversations with, say, the city of Stockton, maintaining the discount is very important. And that is a priority, not to say that more clean energy than PG&E is also not a priority, but being able to say that we're bringing cost savings is a priority. And I think what we're finding is we can have it both ways. We can offer a Bright Choice product that is structurally priced to offer both more clean energy and lower costs, but we're also, with many of our cities, seeing significant acceleration in the adoption of 100% renewables. And the vast majority of customers in those communities are very happy with that proposition and aren't electing to opt down. So certainly we could make some marginal increase in renewables and structurally seek to decrease our savings. That again, obviously, is a question for the board, though.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Cal. Next up, Member Harrison.
Yeah, Nick, I just wanted to ask a question about flexibility. So if we were to vote for this, what would be the path for us to become greener more quickly or to reduce rates more quickly? In other words, 2030 is a long way away for me. And I guess I'm feeling like I'm not sure about doing, 1 year planning is not great. 8-year planning seems like forever, given the climate emergency. So I'm wondering if we could do something that would be more like, what are we doing over the next 4 years? Take a check-in and then do the other 4 years, giving you direction in general, but allowing us to take a pause. Things are changing so quickly. I'm just not comfortable voting for an 8-year plan that keeps Bright Choice where it is, when I think we could be looking at a very different picture in 3 years. So I don't know if you've thought about that or what our role would be in a mid-time check-in on this.
I think certainly we plan to check in on the tactical procurement of renewables every year in the context of the budget. So for instance, in this particular budget, indicatively, we have suggested some tens of millions of dollars be set aside to incrementally buy more renewable energy, but not for just 1 year, but for long-term contracts. So again, indicatively, if we were to set aside some tens of millions of dollars, that might allow us to go and buy 50 or 100 megawatts of renewable energy that we might not have otherwise purchased, given the costs of those projects. That then structurally levels us up from what we have in this schedule to increase it by, say, 5% or 7%. So suddenly we have leveled up by increasing the amount of renewables that we are structurally buying. So in so doing, we are modifying the schedule actually that was shown on slide 10, because we have said we're setting aside some tens of millions of dollars. We have bought 75 megawatts of solar and wind that we might not otherwise have bought. And now instead of our baseline being 45%, our new baseline is 51%. Now, also, though, these projects are long lead time projects, right? So a contract we signed today is likely not going to be online and operating until 2025. The other dynamic at play here, frankly, is we're seeing many of these projects face significant delays, pushing them beyond 2025. And so when we think about setting money aside today, we're looking at setting money aside today for projects that may not start operating for 2 or 3 years. But if we're putting money into more existing units that are not going to incrementally reduce emissions in the near term.
Okay, there's 3 things, right? There's that, what we can do at the Bright Choice level and what we can do in doing more renewables, et cetera. There's also what cities do. I'm asking Oakland to join us in opting up. I think we could see a really different pattern soon. And there's price reductions as renewables become cheaper. I would be more comfortable with a 4-year plan. I just feel like saying it's going to take us 8 years feels like a very long time, and it may be accurate, but I'd rather vote for something for 4 years saying this is where we're going to get to in 4 years. And then we're going to do a huge reevaluation of it. It feels a little, and it's not that I think you're not right. I just think it feels a little like giving up to say it's going to take to 2030. Because again, as I said, the glide path, you know how things work. They don't work in some linear way. They work in big dips and when markets change. So is there some way we could set a 4-year check-in and say what we're doing here is saying, we know it may be 8 years. This is what we're looking at in 4. You have that chart. We're accepting that in 4 and then come back and look at that again. I feel like maybe we're not recognizing these other factors that are not our factors. They're other people's factors, like markets and cities.
Well, I would say that certainly the board has the opportunity at any time to revisit the policy. So, and what I'll say is if we do not pass this today and we do not pass this, we still have a 2030 goal of 100% clean energy. And in the absence of passing this, then the policy that we have is to index to PG&E's Bright Choice. We index Bright Choice to PG&E's level of renewables. So in the absence of passing this, we likely will find ourselves in a place where we're buying less renewable energy because our current policy is to index to PG&E. And certainly, again, we at any time have the ability to revisit, the board can say in 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, hey, let's revisit this. Let's see how things are going.
I think I'd like to explicitly put that check-in in there, and I really appreciate what you're saying. Otherwise, we're in a less good pattern than we would be if we didn't do this. So I would appreciate that. I would just like us to be more proactive and say, we're going to check in on this in 2025 and see where we're at. I mean, of course we could do it any time, but I think we should say we're going to do it, if that makes sense. So that's my only, I think, comment. And then I have one other comment for you, and that is, and this is something I'm just confused about. Have we always said we're going to be a certain price below PG&E? PG&E's rates go through the roof. We're still only 1% below. Maybe we could be more below. I'm worried again about equity and what we're paying. If their prices go crazy, why are we sticking with that? It's a value proposition, I know, but if we could do better, I'm like Lowe's. Wouldn't I want to be 5% less than Sears? I'm just not quite sure why we're so tight there.
Our policy is that we don't change our value proposition more than once a year. But what we do is each year we go through a rate setting process where we can evaluate whether we want to increase or decrease our value proposition. So
all right.
As part of this budget, we will absolutely be evaluating, do we want to increase our discount beyond 1%?
Okay. Well, then I think I understand what you're saying. I just would like this really proactive check-in a little earlier. Things are changing quite fast. So that'd be my one request. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Harrison. I just want to do a time check. It's 7:12 p.m. So I know that Member Hannon and Member Ariola are going to make very brief comments. Member Hannon.
When have you ever known Councilmember Hannon to make brief comments? That's my first point. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the goals that have been set before us are laudable. Staff are to be thanked for their very ambitious goals that they have put before us. And as they state in the memorandum, their goals put us 15 years ahead of California's goal of statewide zero emission by 2045. So they're 15 years ahead of where the state will be. I am concerned about the cost to our low-income residents, and I am concerned that we don't lose sight of the fact that electricity rates are skyrocketing, and those that are most vulnerable in our community are going to suffer these increased costs. And so if we have an opportunity to provide some additional savings to our lowest income residents, that would certainly be something that I would support. Nick, you mentioned about 100,000 care customers. Are those 100,000 care customers that are currently receiving the discount? Or is that the total number of care customers and we're servicing or providing a discount to a small percentage of those?
So all of our care customers receive the care discount. And I believe with the exception of a care customer who has themselves opted up to 100% renewables, I believe every one of our care customers either lives in a community where Bright Choice is the default, thus receives the Bright Choice discount, or those communities that have opted up to 100%, defaulted to 100% renewables, have a condition where care customers are not defaulted onto the more expensive rate.
Thank you, but I would.
Does that explain?
It does.
Mike?
It does, but I would imagine, Nick, that there's, if we're servicing 100,000 customers that are eligible through care, I would imagine that the number that would qualify to become care customers is significantly higher than that, whether they're undocumented citizens, elderly. I would imagine there's a significant percentage of our communities that would qualify that either have not gone through the process to apply for it, don't understand the process to apply for it, and would then unfortunately suffer and continue to suffer these increased rates. So we need to keep all those folks in mind. Thank you.
Yes, I think that is right. We have done some analysis to suggest in some census tracts, those rates are quite high, but not eligible, but not participating. It's actually why we have a number of grants that are outstanding with community-based organizations to actually seek to provide greater access to the care program.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My last comment, and may be premature, but when it's a time, I'm going to go ahead and support the motion, the goals set forth by staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Ariola.
Thank you, and I'll keep it brief. It's something that I kind of mention every year when we have this conversation, and it's just to highlight for our board members that as we move into the Central Valley in particular, it really is a priority for us that our rates were cheaper than PG&E. So, you know, I'm here. You've convinced Councilmember Ariola that we need to go green. We need 100%. But I don't represent Councilmember Ariola. I represent the city of Tracy. And ultimately right now, I'm kind of de facto representing the possibilities of the Central Valley and San Joaquin County. And so I know that that is such a huge priority. And when we were trying to join EBCE, it was not a unanimous vote. It was tough to join. And ultimately, the arguments that I made that were most persuasive that got me the votes were the economic arguments instead of the green arguments. And I know it's a very different kind of cultural concept, because the Bay Area is just, it's more progressive, it's a different culture. But I just want to highlight that as we move forward more eastward, the culture and needs of the residents are a bit different. And so that's why I will always be advocating for a bright choice option that is cheaper than PG&E for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Ariola. And I'll just add my comments last that it was just a few short years ago, but when Member Mandel from the city of Hayward suggested that we have a goal of being emission-free by 2030, that was a big deal. And that was a big deal for this board to go through the process of evaluating whether we should be moving in that direction. And I'm proud that we took that action at that time, and I'm proud of the work that we're doing. And with that, colleagues, what we have on the table is, well, it's not on the table yet because there's no motion, but we're being asked to adopt the schedule with annual power procurement goals for renewable and carbon-free electricity purchases with a path to zero emissions by 2030. So that's the staff recommendation to adopt the schedule. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I will second.
I'll defer to the second.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who the first was.
The second shall be Vice Chair Lopez. Whoever
Okay,
the first is fine.
very good. Who is the first?
Sean Kumagai, Dublin.
Thank you very much. We have a motion by Member Kumagai and a second by Member Vice Chair Lopez. Please call the roll.
Great. Thank you. Alameda County. Alameda County. Albany.
Yes.
Thank you. Berkeley.
Yes.
Thank you. Dublin.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Fremont.
Yes.
Thank you. Hayward. Hayward. Livermore.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hayward's a yes. Sorry, I couldn't unmute, but it's a yes. Thank you for Hayward.
Thank you. Newark.
Yes.
Thank you. Oakland.
Aye.
Great. Thank you. Piedmont.
Aye.
Great. Pleasanton. Pleasanton. Tracy.
Yes.
Okay. Union City. San Leandro.
Aye.
Thank you. Emeryville.
Aye.
Yes. Motion passes.
Very good. Next up, we are back to our regular schedule. In light of the hour, I'm going to ask staff to keep their reports short if they can, but I'll turn it over to Nick for the CEO report.
Sure. I'm going to skip the typical overview of the committee meetings. We did have committee meetings, and I'm just going to jump right into what has been happening in Stockton and San Joaquin County. So I'm happy to report that we are I believe this week, certainly if it's not this week, next week, we'll be having our first presentation with city staff going over our analysis of what inclusion of Stockton would look like. From there, our hope is that if those results are positive both ways, we'll begin the process of bringing back to this board item where we discuss the implications of inclusion of Stockton and making presentations to the Stockton Council as well. And this will be a multi-meeting process certainly for our board and perhaps their board as well. So there will be plenty of opportunity to review the analysis and discuss what it might mean to expand East Bay Community Energy to the city of Stockton. We have had some initial earlier conversations in unincorporated San Joaquin County. So we've been touching base with county officials, and we're hoping to do that more. And then as we think about the other cities, there are limited. I think the city of Lake is probably the one that is the clearest path in addition to Stockton. And that is because cities of Escalon, Lodi, and Ripon are all currently served by municipal utilities and thus not eligible for participation in a CCA.
Okay.
And while the city of Ithaca has long been sort of central in an effort to municipalize part of the PG&E grid, and while participation in a CCA would not preclude participation efforts to municipalize, the indications we've gotten is they're very focused solely on the municipalization of the PG&E grid and thus are not currently interested in sort of a hybrid service from East Bay Community Energy. That is all.
Great, thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. And seeing no hands raised from the board, if we don't have any deliberation, we can move on to the next item, which is the Community Advisory Committee report. I'll turn it over to Anna Olivia Eldred.
Chair Martinez, in interest of time, we love all of our new members. They're great. We are interested in agendizing and bringing back to this body the issue for the community innovation grants, as this has been an ongoing hotspot for our community members. We are thrilled that staff has brought to us that they have made significant progress on metrics for measuring advances in equity in social, economic, and environmental balance of our public projects. And so once those conversations continue, we'll be bringing that to you, and that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing that at a future meeting. Next up, we have our Prepaid follow-on action item, and I'm going to guess that Howard is presenting on this one. Over to you, Howard.
Yes, that is correct. And this is an action item. Thank you, Adrian, for pulling this up. If you can go to the next slide. So this is a second prepaid transaction that we are contemplating. We did present this as an informational item to the executive committee last month. This is an action item specifically to get enabled for the various legal counsel, financial advisor, and credit rating entity related to this transaction, so we can move forward in preparing documentation and such. And then to later bring you forward another action item for actual approval of the transaction itself. So just a little bit of a quick overview. We did one prepay energy transaction already. These are the sort of statistics related to that, close to $1.5 billion. It was a joint deal with Silicon Valley, so roughly half to them, half to us. We took a little bit more than half, and it equates to 59 megawatts around the clock, and translates to roughly $2 million per year in savings. That energy started flowing January 1, 2022, so just a few months ago, and now we're just continuing to assess future PPAs to kind of roll through that first transaction, but going relatively smoothly. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, the prepaid transactions really based off the spread between taxable rates and tax exempt rates. That's what creates sort of value in that structure that we as a tax exempt entity then can utilize the structure for and receive a discount on our energy procurement costs. We've obviously seen quite a bit of volatility over recent years in interest rates. And you can see here a graph basically what this shows is the difference between the tax exempt rate, which is reflected by the light green line, the 10-year MMD, that is a proxy for tax exempt rates. And the dark blue line is equivalent to taxable rates. And so when you see a greater spread, which is then indicated by the gray shaded area, that is more suitable for executing on a energy prepay bond transaction. What we've seen over the last year or so is it was of course suitable because we executed our transaction, and we've additionally seen about 8 prepaid deals completed since our transaction price in September. So given that and these conditions, we want to prepare another transaction to try to take advantage of continuing sort suitable conditions, as we don't know kind of when this volatility won't persist or allow for this type of transaction. Next slide, please, Adrian. The currently proposed transaction, our second prepaid transaction, would be a standalone transaction just for EBCE. So now that we've already executed one, we feel like we can be more nimble and kind of go out to market with our standalone transaction. It would still be issued through CCCFA, the California Community Choice Financing Authority, which is the conduit JPA that EBCE is a member to. We anticipate utilizing all of the prior RFPs and solicitations that we did to choose our various counterparties that I'm asking for approval for here. So they were done through done through competitive process. And given that it was not that long ago, we want to leverage that and be efficient with this process. The last transaction took over 1.5 years to complete, and this one we're hoping for 3 to 6 months. So it would be quite a bit more efficient. And then anticipated is a transaction size of somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion. In total bond raise. We're targeting at the higher end of that. That should just equate to higher savings. So, but that, market will really determine what that sort of balance is between size and discount level. In terms of next steps, we are here today, of course, to seek approval to get enabled with the various parties here, which I'll detail in the next slide. In May or June timeframe, I'm targeting May, but could slip to June. We are planning to bring forward to the full board approval on the transaction docs and to actually move forward with it. And then similarly, we would move forward with the CCCFA conduit in that May or June timeframe to get approval from them. That would allow us to then go out to market. So we would plan to do that in the June or thereafter. And then really it's depending on market conditions to be able to price a bond. So hopefully that would be soon. Our last experience is that we were able to move fairly quickly, but it can be multiple months, and that's why we want to get enabled for this and just be ready to sort of pounce on a good market condition. Next slide, Adrian. This is really the last substantive slide. This is specifically what we're seeking approval for. So we want to get approval to adopt the resolution authorizing the CEO to negotiate and execute agreements with the following firms. There's 4 specifically, 2 law firms, Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe. They would serve as our bond and tax counsel for an estimated total of $300,000. For the law firm Chapman and Cutler, they would serve as disclosure counsel, issuers counsel, and to prepare our official statement, which is utilized to market the bonds themselves. That estimated cost is $200,000. We would look to get enabled with PFM Financial Advisors and Swap Advisors, 2 different subsidiaries under one entity. They've been a financial advisor that we've used in the past on a number of different transactions. That fee is estimated at $200,000. And then lastly, Moody's Investor Service, they would be utilized to rate the actual prepaid bond transaction, not the issuer, not EBCE, just to be clear, but the transaction itself. And that fee is estimated at $275,000. So in total, that is $975,000. We are seeking authorization to go up to $1,125,000. So that includes $150,000 of contingency in case we need to expand scope with one of these consultants or advisors, that we have that ability to do that quickly and get out to market. Though I do anticipate we'll be able to stick to these numbers. And that's really it in a nutshell. There are 2 additional slides as a part of the appendix. Those are general overview slides to explain the prepaid transaction. We've had quite a number of meetings on this in the past with the board and subcommittees, so I don't want to use time now to repeat those, but they're there for reference for the public to have as access. And of course, for some of the board members that may be new, they are there. And I'm of course happy to answer any questions here from the board if you have any on the structure itself. But that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Howard. Colleagues, with your indulgence, I'll ask for public comment first. Adrian, has anyone submitted electronic comment on this item?
There has not been public written comment submitted for this item.
Very good. And I just want to remind those joining us by Zoom, you'd raise your hand to be recognized, or press *9 to raise your hand if you're calling in. And seeing no hands raised, I'll bring it back to the board. Colleagues, are there any clarifying questions? I know we've been over the prepay item many times in the past, so you've all memorized how to do it, and you can do it on your own, just with Howard's shortcuts on the last two slides. So, Member Lopez.
I'd like to move the action item, please.
Very good. We have a motion by Vice Chair Lopez. Is there a second?
Second.
Kavanaugh seconds.
Lots of seconds. I will pick Kavanaugh, I heard. So we've got a motion on the floor from Vice Chair Lopez and a second from Member Kavanaugh. Please call the roll.
Great, thank you. Alameda County? Albany?
Yes.
Berkeley?
Yes.
Dublin? Dublin? Okay, come back to Dublin. Fremont?
Yes.
Thank you. Hayward?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Livermore?
Yes.
Thank you. Newark?
Aye.
Great. Oakland?
Aye.
Thank you. Piedmont?
Aye.
Thank you. Pleasanton? Tracy?
Yes.
Thank you. Union City? San Leandro?
Aye.
Emeryville?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
And I just want to note for the public and for everyone, in fact, that the fact that there was virtually zero discussion on this item just really speaks to the fact that staff has worked really hard to brief the board on this topic, because this is a hefty item. So I'm glad that we're endeavoring to find this opportunity again to take a look at another prepay, because it will forward our goals of getting us to cleaner, greener, more renewable energy. So good move, board. I'm happy that we passed that. So next up, we have another action item to approve our legislative positions. And I will turn it over to staff for that presentation.
Great, thank you. My name is Alec Ward, and I'm Associate Policy Manager here at EBCE. I have with me our political consultant, Ryan McCarthy. He's the Director of Climate and Energy at the Weideman Group. Next slide, please. Tonight, I'm going to give a quick update on our legislative tracker, walking through some of the bills we're recommending the board take a position on. We also firstly have, though, Ryan here, who's going to give an update on our overall legislative state of play. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Next slide. Somebody, first of all, just say it's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to present. We appreciate representing East Bay Community Energy in Sacramento. And I'll try to be quick here, understanding that it's late. So, quickly, just for sort of context setting in Sacramento, this is sort of the calendar year for the legislature. Right now, we are in the second of a 2-year legislative session, and bills are moving through policy committees. Those that have been introduced this year have to get out of policy committees next week. So there's a lot of new bills being discussed in their first policy committee. But it's still early in the process, and there's going to be a lot more activity. They have to go through the Appropriations Committee, get out of their house by the end of May, and then they move on to the second house. But one thing I do want to flag here is the budget and the budget timeline. The governor has proposed an initial budget, and we have the second year of really record-breaking surpluses. And there's a couple slides on this subsequently, but this is really sort of driving the agenda in Sacramento. And we do expect in mid-May, the governor to issue a May revised budget. This will be a revised budget proposal that accounts for updated revenue estimates and may include some tweaks or new elements compared to what we have seen initially. And then it's going to be about a month-long sprint to finalize the budget, which has to be passed by June 15th. And then the governor has till the end of June to sign it. So we're sort of doing policy committees right now, and then it's going to be budget for a month or so, and then it's going to come back in the summer and be back to the policy committees. Next slide, please. I'll go through this quick. You know, I think you guys understand sort of the state of play in politics in California and Sacramento. I will say there's a lot of issues out there right now. It is an election year. We did just have redistricting that's leading to some changes, but in terms of the overall dynamics in Sacramento, we don't expect too much to change. There has been a fair amount of turnover, both because when we set term limits a while ago, that sort of first crop of legislators that came in are coming up on term limits over the next election cycle or so. And also the redistricting and just also some resignations like we're seeing throughout the economy in terms of folks moving on to other roles. So there has been a fair amount of turnover, and we certainly will see some more with the election this year. But in terms of the overall political dynamics, we don't expect too much change. As I mentioned, the budget surpluses and budgeting is really driving a lot of the agenda, not entirely. But it is I guess, a good problem to have, and there's a lot of focus on it, of course. And we do expect energy to be a sort of a policy theme, both in terms of Senate deliberations and bills on the Senate side, as well as the Assembly side, and leadership in both are working to put together an energy agenda. Next slide, please. Just conceptually, as we mentioned, clean energy, both near term and sort of longer term visioning. You know, do we want to accelerate our clean energy targets? How do we get there? Are on the table, but of course we're short on capacity right now statewide, and you know, there's a lot of effort on accelerating near term development of clean energy as well. Climate change and you know, everything that goes on with it, both on the mitigation side as well as the adaptation side and resiliency side. Of course, wildfire, extreme heat is one we're seeing. Corporate disclosure of climate impacts. There's a bill on that is you know, capturing a lot of attention among stakeholders who care about climate change. Zero emission vehicles and infrastructure, a lot of that is on the budget side again, not entirely. And then a few sort of new themes or topic areas. Last year, the legislature tackled offshore wind. This year, green hydrogen and carbon capture and sequestration are squarely on the agenda. And then jobs, labor, equity, and I should have put here too, affordability, sort of cut across all things, certainly energy as well as other topic areas as well. Next slide, please. And just quickly on the budget, as we mentioned, there's a significant budget surplus. We actually expect this will grow further in the May revise. But in his January budget proposal, the governor proposed $22 billion in new climate funding. When combined with $15 billion that was in his budget or in the budget that passed last year, that's a $37 billion investment in climate related programs over the next or over the last 2 fiscal years if this budget were to be enacted. And this funding is expected to cover 3 to 5 years, depending on the different categories. This includes $6.1 billion in additional funding for zero emission vehicles. Last year, there was 3.9. So this is a total proposal of $10 billion over 5 years to advance zero emission vehicles, especially in this budget, they call it big ZEVs, but buses, school buses, transit buses, drayage trucks are all big focus areas. This year, they're also proposing about $1 billion for low-income Californians for ZEV infrastructure, as well as vehicle incentives. A lot on the transit and other transportation projects, some of which could be related to zero emission vehicles, zero emission buses, and other related projects as well. There's about a $2 billion clean energy package, which includes specific funding for long duration storage, green hydrogen, industrial decarbonization and decarbonizing food processing facilities, some for offshore wind and exploring port development. There's a pumped hydro project in Orville Dam that's proposed for funding. And then also about $1 billion for building decarbonization, especially targeting low-income residents. And then a number of other issues related to climate with housing, wildfires, a lot on the natural and working land side, and climate resilience and adaptation. Next, is that back to Alec?
Great, thanks, Ryan.
Yep, thank you.
Here. Thank you. All right, so first we're going to run through the 6 Assembly and Senate bills right here in front of you that we're recommending the board take positions on today. Sent a memo to the board outlining these bills, including one-pagers on all of them except for SB 1393 at the bottom there, which is currently being edited. I'll talk about that a bit more when we get to it. Wanted to note also that this memo has some slight changes to the names and addresses in the legislative program, but no changes to our principles or positions at this time, just small changes there. So I'm going to jump in right now with the first one, AB 1960, that's via Padua. This is a legislator in EBC's territory. As you can see, that's why it's highlighted blue. This bill would support more regional diversity for CPUC commissioners. This could help the PUC become better tuned to the diversity of needs across the state. So that's why we're recommending a support on this bill. AB 2070, this is Power Kahan, another one of the legislators within EBC's territory. This would require an electrical corporation to notice a fire protection district at least 24 hours before a power shutoff, where they would face a penalty. This could help our customers better prepare for outages, and it would also give local government entities like ourselves notice, so we'd be able to help mitigate any potential impacts from these outages. So for this reason, we're also recommending a support. AB 2667, that's Friedman. This creates a new CEC fund for customers that want to adopt DERs, that's distributed energy resources. Really a broad range of technologies eligible here, including demand management, managed charging for electric vehicles, and other DERs that help lower GHG emissions. The incentives would be equitably awarded, and EBCE would even be able to apply on behalf of its customers for these funds. So this could very much help expand our load management programs like Resilient Homes. So we recommend the support. AB 2765, this is Santiago. This creates a new taxpayer-funded public purpose programs fund. The bill states that this new fund would be large enough to pay for all CPUC public purpose programs, including energy efficiency, conservation, low-income bill discount programs such as CARE and FARA. If the commission determines the general fund pot is too small, the commission being the PUC, it will then recover the funds, the costs from ratepayers. But currently all of these costs are being recovered from ratepayers. So this charge would help EBC customers with affordability and would lower disconnections while also promoting electrification by keeping electrical costs competitive. So for this reason, we're supporting this bill. SB 1112 is Becker. This is a technical bill that's increasing reporting to counties on their decarb programs. They're building decarbs. This proposal would better help support tariff on-bill finance proposals, which are currently being examined in a PUC proceeding. It would also require the CEC to study how California can better leverage federal and state funding for decarbonization programs. We support these types of programs because they help overcome a lot of barriers to electrification, including access to capital, credit, as well as home ownership. We see this as a good opportunity to boost and diversify our building decarb programs. So for this reason, we are supporting. SB, the last one here, 1393. This is the one bill that we're recommending an oppose on. This orders local governments to obtain approval from the CEC for any local requirements that mandate the replacement of fossil fuel appliances with electrical appliances in existing buildings. So this would give the CEC the ability to deny projects for a large range of reasons. We see this as unnecessary due to the process cities already have to go through to create these standards, and it could actually discourage and prohibit communities in the EBC territory from adopting good electrification standards. We hear the author's office is amending the bill, so we're going to keep a close eye on it, but for now, we're recommending oppose. If we go to the next page, please. So this concludes the bills we're asking for recommendations on tonight. This next section is going to start with an update on 1814. This is the Grayson bill at top. We previously got board approval to support this bill. We are working to promote it at the Capitol. It authorizes the CCAs to apply for funding through the PUC for transportation electrification TE programs. Unfortunately, we did hear recently that this bill has been pulled this year due to heavy opposition from other parties. We had CUE, the Coalition of California Utility Workers, and the utilities themselves lobbying very hard against this. They saw this as putting us in competition with their transportation electrification work that they were doing. So it turned into the #1 bill that they were looking to defeat this year. So we hope to see this back next year. Now, quickly going to go through 10 bills that we're watching. These haven't risen to the level of support opposed recommendation yet. Some are not as pressing. Some the Cal CCA is leading a charge on. Some are also currently being amended or waiting on more intel. So we're waiting and seeing. AB 2061 is Ting. This is starting with the assembly here on this slide, requires data disclosure from EV charging station and orders the CEC to assess reliability and equitability issues. Cal CCA is currently working with author to clarify and potentially tweak who's subject to these new requirements. So we're waiting to see what this final bill looks like. So it's a watch. AB 2587, this is Garcia. This would require the PUC to open a new proceeding related to the procurement of firm zero carbon resources. Cal CCA is reaching out to find more about the goals of this bill. So until then, we're going to watch. AB 2700, this is McCarty. This requires the PUC to work with utilities to ensure that their distribution systems are upgraded to support the state's anticipated level of EV charging. This requires CARB to share fleet data to inform electrical grid planning, and it requires the CEC to forecast the distribution needs for DERs. We're reaching out right now to the author's office to learn more. So we're currently watching. AB 2703, last one on the list here. Merit Suchi, this is establishing reliability standards for EV charging stations. We're working through Cal CCA right now to make sure this would accomplish the author's intent without any unintended consequences. So we're seeing where this bill ends up as well. So it's a watch. Next slide. Thank you. This is the Senate side bills that we're watching. First one, SB 45, Portantino. This is requires the Department of Resources, Recycling and Recovery to analyze progress in achieving organic waste reduction goals and assist local jurisdictions with funding to comply with the goals. We're currently exploring the potential benefits of this bill, so we're watching for now. SB 833, Dodd. It's a revitalization of last year's SB 99 grant program that goes to local governments to develop and to expedite community energy resilience plans. Right now, we're working with the author's office to see if we can give CCAs a pathway towards participation in this program. So it's remaining a watch. SB 881 is MIN. This gives the PUC the authority to monitor and penalize non-compliance with IRP GHG emission reduction standards. Cal CCA is currently working with the office right now on some fixes, so we're waiting to see how that turns out. But we think if it passes as is, we would have no trouble meeting those new standards. SB 1158 is Becker. This changes power source disclosure standards to become more granular. Right now, the Cal CCA is opposed unless amended. They think it might not be feasible the way it's currently written. So they're working through the CCA with the author to see if we can avoid any hangups here. SB 1287 is Bradford. This one creates massive and likely impossible financial security requirements for CCAs. CalCCA is currently running the calculations on exactly what those impacts would be, but we know they're very problematic. Right now, this is CalCCA's largest opposed bill, so they're taking the lead on this one. SB 1482 is Allen. This is mandatory standards for EV charger installations in multifamily units. Right now, we're working to understand the potential impacts of this bill and working with the author's office. He's already worked with the CCAs a bit, so we're hopeful here. So he'll stay on the watch list as well. Last slide, please. So for next steps, we're going to keep reviewing and analyzing these bills, especially as they're currently being amended. We're going to monitor our watch list. We're going to determine when EBC should take a formal position that we'd bring forth in front of you all as a recommendation. We're going to send afterwards, once we get board approval, position letters for bills. We're going to keep monitoring the governor's budget request, which includes, as Ryan stated, the $6.1 billion over 5 years for zero emission vehicles. And then lastly, we'll continue to engage with CalCCA on any legislative efforts. So that concludes the presentation.
Great, thank you. First, we'll start with public comment on this one. Adrian, is there any electronic comment submitted?
Hold on one second. There is, hold on one second. There's no written comment for this item.
Very good. And I'm looking at the attendees list and seeing no raised hands. We will close public comment and bring it back to the board, starting with Member Kalb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this report. I just had on the bills that we're being asked to newly take positions on. Let me grab. Could you could that slide back up if you don't mind? The one with the new earlier slide. There you go. Thanks. So I don't have any questions on any of the bills except the first one. All the other ones on there, I totally agree with the positions and especially the one that you're recommending of opposition, that bill is, at best, the bill is unnecessary and could be even worse than unnecessary. But this very first one, it's a head scratcher because the way the bill says right now is it just urges or recommends that the governor consider certain geographic diversity, doesn't require anything. Do you think that that's going to change in the Senate and he's going to try to make it into or the supporters are going to try to make it into a requirement and trying to slip it through the assembly now? It seems odd to have such a bill.
Yeah, I have no crystal ball on this one. I do see there that it is saying consider this, which is something. Ryan, I'm not sure if you've heard any sort of update on this, but I certainly haven't heard.
Yeah, we don't have specific intel on anything additional being planned for this bill, but lots of times, any bill gets amended over the course of the process, but including bills that seem, fairly generic, for lack of a better
innocuous.
word here, so,
well,
yeah.
I asked that because strictly from an environmental point of view, if I were to put my environmental advocacy hat on or activist hat on, I would say, I'm not sure I like this bill. I don't know. I don't know if I want to hamstring the governor or cajole the governor into this kind of selectivity that could make it harder for him to appoint somebody he may want, or some people may want, who have strong environmental credentials because they don't live in the right part of the state. So theoretically, it could be a problem if it becomes mandatory. I don't want to make a big deal about it, but I'm just putting on my environmental hat and expressing some concern about the possible impact of this. While I totally understand the geographic diversity desire, there are other elements that are even more important than that, having people who have strong environmental ethic when it comes to being on the commission. And so anyway, that's my only thought. Everything else looks great. Thank you.
Next up is Vice Chair Lopez.
Thank you very much. I actually have a question on the same bill, AB 1960. What's the backstory here? I mean, is there currently, I mean, are the commissioners currently primarily in certain places? I mean, what would it motivate someone to push this and use all that energy and to do such a thing? What's going on?
Right. I know some of the basis is founded in the number of commissioners that are currently based in the Sacramento area. Right. I'm not sure, we have so many new commissioners now exactly where everyone's located, but I know it is grouped together. If you have any more details to share there, and this would be hoping to spread it out across the state instead of having these groupings that occur.
So currently the commissioners are primarily in SAC, reside in SAC, and this is looking to have a certain number spread out. And so currently the commissioners are not spread out. I guess that's why this is being done.
Not spread across the state as evenly as this author would like. Yes.
Okay. I mean, I appreciate what Member Calb has said, we want to give the governor some space, but I do think that we could find, environmentalists outside of Sacramento, and specifically here in Northern California and other parts of Northern California, Southern California. And so I'm willing to support. Thank you.
Chair Eldred.
So the CAC had a robust discussion on this item for about an hour, and I'll just distill that down really short to we urge the board to take a support position in favor of staff's recommendations with one exception, and that is we ask the board to direct staff to change their support position for AB 2765, which is the bill from Santiago, from a support to a watch position. Member Sutter from Hayward brought up some really good points. The vote was all in favor with 2 abstentions. I was one of the abstentions because I wanted to go research the bill better, and having done so, I completely support what Mary Sutter was saying. This bill does not have a floor for energy efficiency funding, and it holds the potential for significantly reduced levels of funding in the future. 60% of energy efficiency funds are placed in the hands of third-party implementers. These implementers are creating a lot of local jobs, and reduced funding in this area can cause a variety of issues and holds a lot of risks. The way that we have to control this is through a general rate case, but this is a really lengthy process, and to use this process for backfill could really cause a lot of interruptions for those same implementers and for our programs. And it does not have any language to protect the fund from any future legislative use for other purposes in the case of future budget issues. So again, we ask the board support staff's recommendations, but request that the board directs staff to change the support position to a watch position for AB 2765. That is all.
Thank you. Member Hannon.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Alex, thanks for the report. I'm always concerned about underfunded mandates to local governments. As you present future presentations on support items, if there's any unanticipated cost to local governments, if you could make reference to that, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Certainly.
And Member Kalp, did you have another question? Your hand is still up.
No, that was before. Thank you.
And Chair Eldred, did you want to say anything more? Okay, very good. So a lot of good comments. We have before us a recommendation from staff to take on these positions. There has been some concern about AB 1960, and then from the CAC on AB 2765. So colleagues, what is the will of the board? Is there a motion, and are there any exceptions to the recommendation as the slate that's put forward by staff? Member Kalp?
I have a question about the bill. I expressed questions about it. Could we, is it something that, could we give direction to our lobbyists, lobbying staff, that if the bill goes from an urging or considering to a requirement, that you come back to the board or the executive committee as soon as possible to rediscuss the possibility of us no longer supporting it? Is that question clear?
It's clear to me. Alec, do you want to answer?
Certainly, yes. I think as it goes, these bills could potentially be amended in a number of ways moving forward. And if any of the ones that you voted on it have been amended in a significant way or in a way that you all have flagged like such, that we could certainly bring it back and would plan to bring it back in front of you all to make sure that we're still supporting what we voted to support.
Okay, I was just noting that sometimes it's a very tight timeline to do that. So sometimes the executive committee might be able to weigh in if the timeline that does not allow for the full board to do it in a timely fashion.
Exactly. Thank you.
And I'll note, Member Kalb, you'll recall that we've done that in the past, where the full board has delegated the executive committee if it were more timely for them to comment on specific bills, to take on those changes. So with that, now that we know that we can make that exception, is there a motion that anyone wishes to offer to accept the recommended bill positions with that caveat for AB 1960? Member Monroe?
I'll move, and with the additional, so with that caveat and with the caveat that should there be significant changes, and I'll leave that as a judgment call to our legislative analysts and lobbyists, that the decision be delegated to the executive board. Does that work as a motion?
It does. Yeah, and that would just
Great.
be conditioned on the timing of when they needed feedback. It would either come back to the board or the executive committee. And then
Precisely.
And
Sorry.
Member Monroe, are you going to speak to AB 2765 in your motion, or are you fine with it as a support?
I was persuaded. I wanted that to be a watch. I'm sorry that wasn't clear.
Okay, very good. So that would be a watch. And colleagues, there is a motion on the table. Is there a second on this motion?
I'll second.
We have a motion from Member Monroe, a second from Member Tiedemann. Please call the roll.
Great, thank you. Alameda County. Albany.
Yes.
Thank you. Berkeley. Berkeley. Dublin. Dublin. Fremont. Fremont.
Yes.
Thank you. Hayward.
Yes.
Thank you. Livermore.
Yes.
Thank you. Newark. Newark. Oakland.
Aye.
Thank you. Piedmont.
Aye.
Thank you. Pleasanton. Tracy.
Yes.
Thank you. Union City. San Leandro.
Aye.
And Emeryville.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Very good, thank you. And that will move us to item 16. This is approval of default product change requests. We've been through quite a few of these before, so I'll ask staff if you can keep it brief, but pleased to see the floor for presentation.
Thank you, Chair Martinez. Good evening, members of the board. Alex DeGiorgio, Public Engagement Manager. Joining me this evening is my colleague, Katie, our Public Engagement Coordinator. And yes, for this item, we'll be asking you to consider approving the default rate change requests from the cities of Emeryville and Dublin. So this continues an impressive trend by EBCE cities to transition their default electricity service to our Renewable 100 option. I realize that your board has considered items of this kind a couple of times before now, so more than a couple actually. So I'll leave most of the background and the details to the staff report we've prepared, but I have prepared a quick synopsis for the record and for members of the public who may not have attended our previous meetings. Madam Chair, given the late hour, would you like me to provide that? It would be very brief. I'd also plan to invite Kate to provide a brief update on how the current Renewable 100 default enrollments are progressing. Shall I go ahead and give a quick synopsis?
We'll give a quick synopsis, and yeah, Kate is here, so let's hear from her as well, but keep it as brief as you can. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. So in January of this year, Renewable 100 became the default service for residential customers in Dublin and for residential and commercial customers in the cities of Albany, Hayward, and Pleasanton. And then in March, just last month, Renewable 100 became the default service for residential customers in the cities of Berkeley and San Leandro. And it is set to become the default service for commercial customers in both of those cities in October of this year. More recently, as our chair is well aware, the fine city of Emeryville voted, the city council that is, voted unanimously to request that Renewable 100 become the default service for both residential and commercial customers. And Dublin City Council voted unanimously to make Renewable 100 the default for its commercial customers. If approved, these two default service transitions would occur in October of this year, along with those of Berkeley and San Leandro. I should note that the timing of these transitions is consistent with the board's default rate change request policy, which was approved in March of last year. And I should also mention, as I think Nick mentioned before, that in Emeryville and Dublin, as with all of the other cities that have changed their residential default service to Renewable 100, customers on low income and medical discount programs will have Bright Choice as their default service, since it is the most competitively priced option. But those customers are, of course, very welcome to enroll in Renewable 100 if and when they choose to do so. And customers that have previously selected Bright Choice or have opted out of EBC service will not be included in the default enrollment to Renewable 100. And that's the synopsis of the state of affairs for the moment. And so with that, I'd like to invite Kate to go ahead and provide a very brief update on how the current Renewable 100 default transitions are going in those cities I just mentioned. Kate, the floor is yours, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. So to keep things very brief today, overall, we are quite pleased that in the 6 jurisdictions that have changed their default product to R100 this year, more customers have responded by choosing to opt down to Bright Choice instead of opting out of EBCE service entirely, which is very encouraging to see. And just take a quick moment to zoom in to Dublin. Since we started notifying customers about the change, residential customers that is, in November of 2021, we've seen very little movement in the community's opt-out rate, just a slight increase of 0.5%. And then roughly 3.8% of those customers in Dublin have voluntarily opted to remain on Bright Choice. So not a lot of customer action in response to this change. And then the numbers out of Albany, Hayward, and Pleasanton that underwent community-wide default transitions in January roughly mirror this trend as well. So with that, I will throw it back to you, Alex.
Thanks, and Chair Martinez, that's our report. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And I will start with public comment. Adrian, has anyone submitted electronic comments on this item?
There have not been written comments submitted for this item.
Very good, and seeing no hands raised, I'll just give it a moment in case someone raises their hand from the public. Seeing no hands raised, we will go ahead and close public comment at this time and bring it back to the board. And I have Vice Chair Lopez first.
Just a request, if you can send the board maybe after the meeting, how many people decided to opt back down, what that percentage was. I did see something come through my city's manager's office, but I'd like to kind of see like a month out, like what happened. That would be, I think, useful information to go back to our cities with. Thank you.
Very good. Colleagues, is there any other discussion on this item? And absent that, do I have a motion? Go ahead, Alex. You want to respond?
I was just going to mention that those figures are included in the CEO report, the updated enrollment numbers for the cities that have most recently transitioned.
Very good. Thank you. So we will look to the CEO report for that information. And with that, colleagues, is there a motion on the table or from a member? Member Tiedemann.
I would move the resolution.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second. Lopez.
Motion from member Tiedemann, a second from Vice Chair Lopez. Please call the roll.
Great, thank you. Alameda County. Albany.
Yes.
Thank you. Berkeley. Dublin. Fremont.
Yes.
Hayward.
Yes.
Livermore.
With pleasure.
Thank you. Newark. Oakland.
Aye.
Okay. Piedmont.
Aye.
Pleasanton. Tracy.
Yes.
Thank you. Union City. San Leandro.
Aye.
Emeryville.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have board member and staff announcements, including requests to place items on future agendas. Colleagues, do you have any announcements or future agenda items? Seeing none, that'll bring us to adjournment. The time is 8:11. Thank you to all the members who helped us keep quorum this long and staying to this late hour. Appreciate you. Thank you to staff for the great presentations and all the work that you do. And that is it for tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Happy
Thank you
Earth
for
Day to
what you do.
everybody.
Thank you.